Today is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. On this day, we honor the children who never returned home and the survivors of residential schools, as well as their families and communities. Both the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation and Orange Shirt Day are observed on September 30th. Orange Shirt Day is an Indigenous-led grassroots initiative that raises awareness of the intergenerational impacts of residential schools on individuals, families, and communities. It was inspired by Phyllis Webstad, whose orange shirt was taken on her first day at a residential school and never returned. The color orange now symbolizes the legacy of residential schools, hope, and the commitment to the truth that every child matters.
Residential schools operated from the 1870s to 1997, harming at least 7 generations of Indigenous peoples. More than 150,000 First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children were forced to attend. They were taken from their families, language, and culture. The government's goal was to erase their cultural identity and assimilate them into mainstream society. At the schools, children were often shamed or abused for speaking their language or practicing their culture. Many never returned home.
On this day, we recognize the ongoing trauma caused by residential schools and remember those children who never returned, survivors, and their families. This day is also an opportunity to commit to the truth and reconciliation with Indigenous communities. What is truth? Truth is acknowledging what happened to the Indigenous, First Nations, and Métis people in residential schools and throughout Canadian history.
What does reconciliation mean? Reconciliation is the path of repairing a broken relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. It involves honoring Indigenous peoples and their unique contributions to Canada.
Where are we on the path to reconciliation? In 2008, reconciliation was made official with the launch of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, over 6 years. The TRC heard from 6,500 witnesses and families about the lasting impacts of residential schools and other mistreatment of Indigenous peoples.
The result of the TRC was a report in 2015 that listed 94 calls to action to help repair the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities and prevent future and ongoing harm. The 94 calls to actions are separated into different sections, including healthcare, education, child welfare, language and culture, and justice. As of now, only 15 calls of actions have been completed. The call to action on education involves learning about the history and legacy of residential schools and the history of Indigenous peoples in Canada. It also involves building student empathy, respect, and mutual understanding.
This year marks 10 years since the Truth and Reconciliation Commission released the 94 calls to action in 2015. In this video, journalist and Indigenous citizen Walmish Hamilton on the meaning and importance of the calls to action.
10 years ago, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission released 94 calls to action. The TRC was set up in 2008. In over 6 years, officials traveled across Canada hearing from thousands of residential school survivors. I was working as a reporter at CBC Manitoba then. It was a stellar moment, both in my career as a journalist and as an Indigenous citizen. That day was a touch point. In my opinion, the calls to action represented a shift in how Indigenous people were going to be considered and understood. A map for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in Canada, reconciling our dark past with a brighter future we're working to create together. The calls to action are a call for just that. Action. There has been some progress as far as I see it. Before, I never heard land acknowledgements anywhere. Now, this diplomatic gesture is more commonplace. Even the king acknowledged the Algonquin and Anishinaabe in his speech from the throne. It's not a be-all, end-all, but it adds gravitas when taken together with other diplomatic measures. And the last decade hasn't been without challenges. Some municipal officials refuse land acknowledgements. Schools struggle with implementing Indigenous curriculum. Indigenous people are more likely to have chronic health issues and less likely to have a family doctor. And some think the pace of reconciliation is too slow. No one said the path we're on was going to be an easy one. As we mark this anniversary, Consider that many of our successes have come as a result of collaboration. We need to take each other into account. We are all part of this. Too often, we treat each other as though life is an episode of Survivor, that we can vote each other off the island when it suits us. In reality, we can't do that. We're here, all of us, to stay. What we can do is decide how we want to live together, now and onward. I consider the 94 calls to action excellent starting points. And 10 years down the road, they've given us a lot to talk about with each other. In Vancouver, I'm Wamish Hamilton.
Teachers, please take some time to discuss the following questions with your class. What can we do at the DSBN Academy to support further the process of truth and reconciliation? What can we do to further support the process as a wider society?